let us now begin our course orientation. Anyway, this will be very short. So I'd like to reiterate some or few points here. I hope that we will practice the following, no? Because it will help us. It will help us, especially me, monitor students. So later on, there might be problems, and adhering to these tips, to these points, will greatly help us. So let me start first with our profile accounts, profile names, account names. So there are a lot of social media that we are using today. Our Facebook accounts, our email accounts. Your email account is actually the same account that is reflected in our Google Classroom. So I'd like to encourage everyone to use their real names. This is not the first time that we are mentioning this one. Last year, the year before, students are supposed to use their real name so that monitoring will be easy, especially after the course. Kung may mga kailangang i-notify, then it would be really easier for us if you're using your own name, because we can immediately look for you. So kindly use your real names in your Facebook. Mas maganda kung first name, middle initial, and your surname, or first name and your surname. Makikita natin dapat doon. Avoid shortcuts, or avoid shortcuts. Yan, Jairus, yes. Nagpaalam na yung classmate nyo kagabi that you will be having a Google Meet for your actual course today. So you're actually excused. Anyway, this is recorded. You can always go back. Alright. So let's go back to what we were talking about. Your names. So I hope that everyone is using their proper names here. Mas maganda din na lagyan natin a student from Benguet State University taking this particular course para mas madaling i-track. Alright. I'd like also to emphasize, no, in our Google Classroom, your actual name should be reflected there. Let me show you an example of this one. So this is my Google Classroom. Of course, that should be my profile picture. The top right part of this one. I am using my PC, so ito po yung ating interface. So that should be my profile pic. It's also better if we make it more formal. Let us avoid pictures na naka-side view, yung mga tipong pang-bagets. Formal, parang ID picture lang dapat siya para makita talaga yung mukha. Okay, and then your names. So marami akong nakita kasi in our Google Classroom, for example. These are your names. Naka-ganyan na siya, no? Naka-Aniban, Abigail R. Actually, there's a technique in our settings para automatic siya na sort natin according to the surname or according to your first name. Hindi lang siya iisa na nakaganyan. What do I mean? Dito sa ating settings, if we click that one, meron tayong settings dito sa baba. And if we click that one, it will link us to a way where we can edit our profile accounts. This is my account. This is a private, personal Google Classroom that I am using. So to change your name, go to account setting. Let us just click that one. Yan yung nag-show. Yan, let us specify our first name there. So if your first name is that, then just write your first name and then the last name. Huwag nating isulat na Sibaan, Nick. Let's just follow this one and then save. I don't have to save anything there. Yan, so ganun dapat yung ating profile sa ating Google Classroom. What else about our classes? So what's the nature of our classes? How do I conduct our class? Your course you are enrolled is called Calculus 1. That is normally differential calculus. For the BSED group, it's called Calculus 1 with analytic geometry. So yun yung tawag ng kanilang course. It's really the same. It's just the same. So how do I conduct my classes? The primary learning material that I am giving you is your module. So I am making your module in great detail. So I hope you already read your first module, because I sent that already last Tuesday, I think. And then to supplement the modules that I am giving, I normally give YouTube videos, or we conduct virtual classes, for example these Google meetings, just to supplement everything that was included in the module. So do not expect that in a virtual class or in a Google Meet I will be explaining the topics in the same detail as was presented in the module. So actually we are doing a Google Meet class just to give examples, or just to give supplements, or just for you to have an opportunity to ask your questions. So yan. Yun yung purpose sana ng ating Google Classroom. There are other activities. For example, I'll be preparing applets para lang masuportahan ang mga topics that were included in your modules. Yeah, so that's just the nature of our classes. For the activities, for the tests, so this will be the basis of computing your grades later on. So after the modules that I'll be sending you, the last part, there are summative tests there. So you focus there. Yun kasi yung isasubmit ninyo. But the submission for all the tests that you will be doing, you'll be answering that using a Google form. So there is a Google form equivalent of the summative test that is included in your modules. For the majority of the summative tests, after answering the Google form, you will be required to submit your solutions. So bali dalawa ang isasubmit ninyo. First, you will answer the Google form and then submit the complete solutions. Yan. So halimbawa kasi sa Google form, kunyari multiple choice, what is the derivative of this function A, B, C, D, pipiliin mo lang kunyari C. But the solution, kailangan yung isulat yan at isasubmit nyo pa rin. So dapat yung C na yun nasagot mo doon sa item na yun, dapat doon sa solution nagre-reflect talaga doon na C din yung sagot. So lahat ganon actually. From the first, except pala yung first no, na summative activity, no solution is required. But for the incoming activities, summative tests, you will answer the Google form, plus you will also submit your complete solution. So sinasabi na natin to para kung meron na tayong module na susunod, you organize now your solution so that later on, mas madali na lang ang submission. I normally give you a lot of days to submit a particular summative tests. On average, I give 2 to 3 days of submission. 4 sometimes pag medyo mahaba, I am giving 4 days to submit. So imagine that you will answer the form in 4 days. Also the submission of the complete solution. By the way, all classes are recorded. So you do not have to worry about the recording of any Google class that we will be having in the future. Actually, I'm recording this one also. They're all recorded and they will be uploaded in our Google Classroom for those students who will not be able to join us live. I am planning now to siguro I will upload it in YouTube because other students find it more easier daw to watch in YouTube. Unlisted na lang. I will upload it as an unlisted video. Yung mga ating Google Meets. Yan. Alright? Google Meet reminder or in general, our ethics and etiquettes. Kailangan nating tandaan yung ating behaviors. Especially when we are communicating with our teachers. So it's not really applicable only to me but to all. So make sure that your microphone is off, no? Naka-mute siya. If you are not talking or if you were not called to talk. How about the cameras? Do we have to open our cameras when we do virtual meetings? The answer is yes, because that is a sign of participation. You want to participate, and it's really more engaging if I can see your faces when I talk to you and I can see you live kung ano yung ginagawa ninyo. But for students who are using data, I understand that opening your cameras can actually consume a lot of data. So in that case, pwede nating i-off yung ating cameras. So only for students na stable yung kanilang internet connection, nasa bahay, wala namang problema, please open your cameras also. Para hindi lang ako yung nakikita niyo. So we can also see your classmates, their faces, hindi lang picture yung nakikita natin. Ayan. Alright. So I think yun lang naman yung course orientation natin. Yung grading system natin, I think you are familiar with that already because this is for the majority of students here, this is your second semester. Yun sa group ng BSED, this is your fourth semester here in Benguet State University. We are still waiting for announcements whether we're going to conduct within face-to-face classes. Although personally, I think malabo yun kasi if we look at the news, medyo madami na tayo na naman ng cases. So anyway, ganito lang ang siguro for now ang mode ang ating delivery of instruction. Okay. So that's it. That's for our course orientation unless you have questions. The solutions ganun din. The Google form will be attached in our Google saglit, baka pwede tayong mag-sample. Wala akong na-prepare. Anyway, the Google form will be attached in a Google Classroom activity. So you will answer that and then you will return. Yung i-return nyo doon yung solutions ninyo. So Google Classroom lahat ng submission natin for both of your solutions and the Google form. So it's like an ordinary submission. Pwede yung picturean or scan. Dapat naka-soft copy of course yung solution ninyo. Tapos i-upload nyo na lang sa Google Classroom. Ganun lang. Yung solution natin ay handwritten. Yes. Alright. So, meron po ba tayong tanong before we proceed to our next first lecture actually? Right? I take it as wala. So, we can now proceed to our first lecture. So I hope you opened already the first module that I sent you as I instructed. That is a little long because I am actually doing it in purpose for students who come from the non-STEM strand from the senior high school. Wala sila kasing calculus at dito sa college kasi we are assuming that all the students have taken already a calculus class. Kaya medyo mabilis sana. However, I know that there are students, actually a lot of them comes from the non-STEM strand or those people na wala pang experience sa calculus. And we have to start from the very beginning. So chapter 1 are preliminary topics. So that it will be easier for you to understand the concepts in the actual calculus topics. Kung hindi natin na ito gagawin, baka medyo mas mahirap yung intindi natin for the actual topics. So preliminary starts with what topics na nga? Anyone? How did we start the module? Meron bang nakabasa sa ating module? What was the first part?
Sir,
yes, JB?
Sir, the real number system.
The real number system, that's right. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation for that. Yeah. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, by the way, if there are technical difficulties, baka makalimutan kong mag-unmute when I check the mute button, pakisabi na lang, or there's something wrong with the presentation I am sharing, you can just raise your hand para makorek natin. Alright, so tama ka JB, the first part of that preliminary chapter is on the real number system. So basically, we will be learning, or we will be reviewed of the different numbers that we have, because there are different numbers that we have in mathematics. So the way I presented the real number system is like a hierarchy. So the hierarchical relationships. We started actually with the most basic set of numbers. By most basic, I mean the first types of numbers, the kinds of numbers that were first developed. So ito yung mga naunang mga klase ng numbers na na-develop noon pa. Because numbers were not developed all at the same time, no. So the first one here is called the natural number. That's why it's called natural number, because it's the starting point. So I haven't written itong mga numbers na nakikita natin sa ating PowerPoint presentation in set notation, but these are actually sets. So if it's a set from your mathematics of the modern world topic, diba? We use a pair of braces. Yes, braces, not brackets. We actually separate the elements with commas. Yeah. And then we use ellipses for infinite sets, just to indicate that there are infinitely many elements here. So this is our natural numbers. It starts from 1. Sometimes we call it the counting numbers, because it's the numbers that we use to count. When I ask you to count your fingers, you do not start with 0. Otherwise, you only have 9 fingers. So you start with 1. That's how we start, or that's where we start to count. It's always starting with 1. So ito yung set of natural numbers na meron tayo. And then when we add the number 0, the set is not just called a natural number, but the set of whole numbers. So the only difference between the set of natural numbers and the set of whole numbers is the presence of 0. So when we say whole numbers, the counting numbers plus 0. Sino yung nakaimbento ng 0? If I'm not mistaken, it's actually yung evidence. When we use the evidence that we have today, it's actually the Mayans, I think. It's an ancient civilization. They use 0 to indicate emptiness, nothingness, in their number system. How did we arrive at that oval loop to represent 0? I think it's the shape that is left when you take out a shell from the sand. So parang merong cavity doon that will resemble 0. So na-develop na lang siya as to the 0 that we have today, the character for 0 that we have today. Alright, we also have the negative integers. It's like the negative of the natural numbers. So these are actually the natural numbers, -1, -2, and so on, but negative. So negative integers. Kindly mind the notations that we are using. So ang natural numbers, we can actually write that in symbol as Z, tapos meron siyang superscript na positive, meaning positive integers. By the way, ang integers natin, ang symbol ay, that's not actually the English letter na capital Z. It's a Greek letter. Ayan. Alright. If we are going to take the union, meaning we're going to combine the elements of the whole numbers and the elements of the negative integers, another set is formed that is overall what we call the set of integers. Yeah. So negative numbers, positive numbers, or positive natural numbers, including 0, that comprises our integers. Para makita natin, hindi siya Z. Para may double na lines dito sa diagonal part. Just to indicate that we are talking about the set of integers. Let's continue. So, meron din tayong tinatawag na fractions. So, ratio of two numbers. Diba? Fractions, part of a whole. Ito yung mga nandito. Of course, I cannot provide you all the fractions that we have. These are just examples. That's why we have the ellipses at both ends to indicate that there are a lot more fractions that we can have. if we're going to combine the set of integers and the set of fractions, they are generally called, all together, they are called the set of rational numbers. And the rational numbers are those that can be put as a ratio of two numbers. That's why the name is rational. The root word is ratio. So, lagi nating tatandaan yon. Rational siya kapag nakasulat siya as a ratio. So, negative 97/70, that's obviously a ratio. Meron tayong numerator at meron tayong denominator. How about negative 6? Is this a ratio? Although indirectly, no. Kasi parang isa lang naman yung number na nakikita natin dyan. But remember that negative 6 is the same as negative 6/1. That's negative 6. So it's still a ratio. You can actually think of other pair of numbers when put into ratio will give us negative 6. Halimbawa, negative 12/2. So negative 12/2 is a ratio and that is equal to negative 6. So these are all what we call the rational numbers. Because if a number cannot be put as a ratio of two numbers, then we call that the set of irrational numbers. And because we cannot put that as a ratio of two integers, actually specific integers dapat, ratio of two integers para masabi siyang rational numbers. If we cannot do that, it's called an irrational number. And because they are irrational number, they cannot be put as a ratio of two numbers. We normally use letters or may mga iba naman na numbers dyan, pero it's not an integer. So here are some examples, few examples of irrational numbers. Pi, E is called the Euler's number. What is phi? In Mathematics in the Modern World, Chapter 1, ano na nga yung phi? What number is this? Anyone? Ano na nga yung phi? Phi. Anyone who can recall? Chapter 1 yun. It's the golden
ratio, sir.
Yan. The golden ratio. And it's approximately equal to 1.62. Euler's number is approximately equal to 2.72. Pi is approximately equal to, alam nyo na to, lagi-lagi ito, 3.14. Square root of 2 is approximately, I think, 1.42. Ganon. So if you notice, we are only approximating kasi nga, these are irrational numbers. If we put this in decimal, they will appear. So, ang decimal values natin ay hindi natatapos. That's what we mean by non-terminating. And then, non-repeating. The numbers in the decimal will appear random. So, walang pattern na makikita natin. For irrational number, pwedeng finite yung number of decimal values or places, pwede rin namang infinite pa rin. Pero makakakuha tayo ng pattern dito like 0.3333, 0.257, although they are non-terminating, they are still considered rational number because they are repeating. So merong pattern doon. Ulitin natin, for rational numbers, when put into decimal form, they are non-terminating, at the same time, non-repeating. For rational numbers, sometimes they are terminating, sometimes they are non-terminating. But for non-terminating rational numbers, they must be repeating. They has to be repeating. If we take the union of these two sets, ito na yung sinasabi natin na the set of real numbers. So lahat-lahat yon from the natural numbers, whole, negative, fraction, integers, rational, irrational. If we combine all those elements, the set that we produce is called the set of real numbers. And in calculus, it's the real numbers that we deal with. So, meron pa actually mas mataas dito, as was mentioned in your module, it's the complex numbers. But in calculus classes, basic calculus classes like this, we only talk about the real numbers. So, real numbers, pababa lang yan. We will not be talking about complex numbers. Alright. So, ito yung mga klase ng numbers na gagamitin natin in this class. Alright. So, that's the real number system. Normally, or geometrically, we use the number line to represent it. So itong number line na ito, nandyan lahat-lahat ang mga real numbers na meron tayo. So of course, normally we start with the middlemost part, that's 0, and then positive ang nasa right side and negative yung nasa left side. Now, how do we plot irrational numbers? Kasing approximations yan. I-approximate din natin. So, yan. Since we do not have the exact values, we approximate. Normally, we approximate up to 2 decimal places or 4 decimal places. 2 to 4 decimal places. Alright. The next part there is the Cartesian coordinate plane. Hindi ko na ito i-discuss in detail because I believe you know this one already. So the Cartesian coordinate system is a very powerful tool in mathematics that led to the development of majority of the mathematics that we have today, especially analytic geometry, calculus, kaya natin pinag-uusapan ito ngayon. So what is the Cartesian coordinate plane? It's formed by intersecting they are intersecting perpendicular lines. So actually number lines ito. So kanina pinakita natin na ang line na ito, they are consisting or representing the real number system. So if we have a vertical number lines sa paganyan, mafo-form natin yung ating Cartesian coordinate plane. And basically, ano na yung gamit ng ating Cartesian coordinate plane? Anyone? Saan natin ginagamit ang Cartesian plane?
Graphing.
Graphing what?
Plotting numbers of equation.
Plotting numbers, or more precisely, what do we plot?
Values of x and y.
How do you call that? Values of x and y. As a pair, you call that a ordered pair, or technically a point. Tama ba? So point, yun lang ang gamit ng Cartesian plane. Yes. So a point is a number pair. Yun yung sinabi ninyo. The number pair, the first number is normally called the x coordinate or the first coordinate, or di ba abscissa yata? Abscissa. The second number in that pair is called the ordinate, the y coordinate or the second coordinate. So yun lang naman. And from there we build concepts. First, maganda yatang ito ang nakita natin. There. So this is my GeoGebra. This is our Cartesian plane. So as was presented kanina, although ang nakikita natin dito sa x-axis, this is the horizontal line, ay mga integers, no? Pero syempre, automatic na may mga values in between because this line nga represents the real numbers. So may mga fractions dyan na naka-insert, may mga irrational numbers dyan na naka-insert. Ganun din sa ating y-axis. And the Cartesian plane, as we mentioned, is used to plot points. So halimbawa, this is point 3, 4. Yan, na-plot na si point dito. So yun yung halimbawa ng mga points na meron tayo. Another point, let's say just point B. Negative naman, negative 2 and positive 4 ulit, hindi 5. Yan. Or doon na lang 1. That's point B. So these is how we name points, normally with capital letters, not small, capital. The point must be enclosed with a pair of parentheses. Do not forget that. In the elements, the two numbers here are separated by a comma. This is what we call the first coordinate, 3 and negative 2. 4 and 1 are our second coordinate or ordinate, abscissa ordinate. That we can stick with the x coordinate and the y coordinate for the sake of simplicity. So what's next here? I think we will now proceed with the distance formula. So in some topics kasi of calculus later on, we will be using this concept. We'll be using the distance formula to compute the distance between two points. So since we are talking about distance formula, what do we mean here? We are computing the distance. So halimbawa yung dalawang points na meron tayo, it's A and B here. As we can see here, what we want is this distance. So that directed distance from point A to point B, yun yung gusto nating i-measure. That's what we want to solve or compute. And how do we do that? In your module, I've given you already the formula. And there are actually a lot of variants. Parang COVID-19 coronavirus lang. May variants. Any of those formulas you can use. Dito na lang so that we can solve the distance between these 2 points manually. So let's make it short para makalayo-layo tayo ngayon. How do we use the distance formula? By the way, what is the distance formula? That's D. That's the square root of the sum of the squares of the differences between the x and y coordinates. So we can start with x sub 2 minus x sub 1, y sub 2 minus y sub 1, or x sub 1 minus x sub 2, y sub 1, y sub 2. So kahit ano to. So ang gagawin lang naman natin dyan, just assign which is which. So kung ito si x sub 1, malamang ito si y sub 1, ito si x sub 2, at ito naman si y sub 2. And then just plot it in our formula. Yeah. So how do we do this? X sub 2 is negative 2 minus x sub 1 is 3. Square that. Let's continue. Y sub 2 is 1 minus 4. That's the value of y sub 1 squared. Of course, we start simplifying inside. So negative 2 minus 3. Pag hindi pa kayo marunong mag-combine ng numbers, so we have your calculators. Pero by this stage, at this stage, dapat alam nyo na negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5 squared plus 1 minus 4. That gives us negative 3 squared. The square of negative 5 is just 25. And the square of negative 3 is just 9. So this is square root of
34. The square root of 34.
34, yes. So how should we proceed then? At this stage, we have now square root of 34. Should we leave our answer that way or may pwede pa tayong gawin?
Decimal, sir.
Decimal? Kung i-decimal natin, then it does not become exact. Meron bang exact decimal value ang square root of 34?
Wala, sir.
Wala. Can we simplify this one? Siguro may factor ang 34 na perfect square. That way we can rewrite it. I don't think so. So square root of 34 is as is. This is na final answer. Kung sana kasi, kunyari, square root of 12 is our answer. Kunyari lang. Can we still rewrite this one? Yes, because 12 can be written as 4 times 3. And 4 is a perfect square, so we can put that outside as 2. Our final answer becomes 2 square root of 3. So ganyan lang yung ating simplification. We do not actually write them in decimal form because sometimes it becomes only an approximation. So this is still an exact number in another form. 2 square root of 3. Pero kung perfect square siya, edi square root natin. So halimbawa square root of 25, the answer is of course 5. Alright, do we need more examples or we should proceed?
No, sir.
Magbigay tayo ng mga fractions. Fraction naman ngayon.
More, sir.
Sabihin natin point C ay 5 and negative 1/2. And another point D, 7 and 1/4. And our task is to compute for the distance between the two. We know that the distance is the sum of the squares of the differences between the coordinates. Yan. So, alin dito ang gagawin nating x sub 1? Ganyan na para mas maayos. X sub 2, y sub 2 para diretso na tayo. So let's just substitute the values here. X sub 2 is 7 minus x sub 1 is 5. Square it. Y sub 2, ito yung mga fractions natin. 1/4 minus, that's minus comes from the formula. That's negative. So ilagay natin ulit dyan ang negative 1/2 squared. So subtract 7 and 5, 2 plus, now we need to simplify this one. 1/4 minus negative 1/2 becomes, paano?
Addition, sir.
Magiging addition plus 1/2. How do we add this one? Well, 1/2 is just the same as 2/4. Tama ba? Ang 2
Yes,
over
sir.
4 ba ay 1/2? Bakit ko
Yes,
ginawa
sir.
yun? Why did I rewrite it this way? Para lang pareha sila ng denominator na 4. Because if the denominators are just the same, adding a fraction is much easier. Because we will just copy the denominator and add whatever the numerators are. So 3/4 lang siya. Para hindi na tayo nag-LCD, pwede naman yun. LCD, multiply, add, and all. We will still arrive at 3/4. So yung nasa gitna ay 3/4. Still need to square that one. Alright, let's square 2. Of course, that will give us 4. And then, how do you square a fraction? There's nothing special. There's square the numerator, square the denominator. That's how you square a fraction. So 9/16. Still, we have to work with the numbers inside. So we are adding a fraction and a natural number or an integer. So that's sulat natin dito 4 plus 9/16. 16 ang ating denominator dito. So how can we write 4 para meron siyang denominator na 16?
Over 1.
4/1.
4/1? Ang 4 dapat 6/16 siya. So ano yung numerator? 64 ba?
64, sir.
Yun, 64. So we are using our intuition dito Paano natin nalaman? Well, nag-multiply ka ng 16/16, di ba? Parang 4 times 16/16. Why did we choose 16? Because we are beating that 16 para 16/16 then yung denominator ni 4 dapat. So 4 times 16 is 64. So 64/16 is just another way of writing 4 plus 9/16. So ang sagot natin, we can just copy the denominator and add whatever the numerators are. So that will give us 73.
3.
Can we simplify that further? I don't think so because 73 is a prime number. So we now write our final answer here, 73/16. Now, how do we rewrite our final answer? Can we still rewrite this one or we stopped at square root of 73/16?
Can be repeated, sir.
We can,
Yes, sir.
ano?
Yes, sir.
Saan galing ang, ano yung tanong? Sir, saan galing yung 9/16? 9/16 is the square of 3/4. The square of 3 is 9, the square of 4 is 16. So dito, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. Okay. So, since 73 is a prime number, wala nang pwede tayong gawin dyan. That's just square root of 73. But, square root of 16 can be simplified as 4. Tama? Kasi 16 is a perfect square. So, I am not writing anything here in decimal form. Kita yung shadow ng ulo. Okay lang yan. Okay. Are there any questions regarding distance formula?
None, sir.
Okay. So if you notice, what are the skills that we need here? Combinations of numbers, di ba? Operations on numbers. How do you add 2 positive numbers? How do you add 2 negative numbers? Yun yung alam ko na confusing dito. Well, wala tayong magagawa. You need to master that. You need to master how we combine numbers. And as I mentioned a while back, we can use our calculators if you are not sure. Saan na nga ba yung calculator natin? Nag-add ako ng... Ayan. Can you see my calculator here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
What if I'm going to do all this in my calculator? Can we do that? Yes. Square root of, and then ang nasa loob ay may parenthesis. So parenthesis 7 minus 5 squared, close parenthesis, tas square. I'm just following this one, itong part lang. Plus another open parenthesis 1 over 4. So may fraction tayo dito. 1 down arrow 4 para masulat natin si 1/4. Right arrow para mapunta ang cursor sa right, minus open parenthesis again, and then that's negative a fraction, which is 1/2. Then square ulit. And the answer is square root of 73 over. Same answer. Although, syempre nga, I will be asking your solutions. So ito, you can just use it to verify that your answer is correct. So this calculator is really powerful. So let's then proceed to ngayon, what's the next topic that we have there? Sum, undefined, and indeterminate form. That's really important because that will always be the tricky questions in calculus. Alright, so anyway, let's just have a review. You can open your microphones to tell me immediately the answer. So 1 second lang isusulat ko yung question, sagutin nyo agad.
One.
Alright.
Zero. Zero.
Ano to?
Undefined.
Undefined, sir.
Identified.
Ano?
Undefined.
Identified ang narinig ko.
Undefined, sir.
Defined. Sige.
Unidentified daw, sir.
Undefined. Not defined. Ganun. Hindi siya unidentified flying object.
Undefined, sir.
Alright. How about that one?
Intermediate.
Hoy, magbasa nga kayo ng maayos. Anong intermediate? Wala.
Indeterminate.
Indeterminate.
Indeterminate pala.
Sir, nagagalit po sila.
Yeah, indeterminate form. Yeah. So,
Green signal lang.
that's a good sign. I think you read your module. So that's good. All right. So if you are dividing a non-zero, so non-zero, ibig sabihin kahit anong real number yan basta hindi zero. Normally we represent that as n. If you divide it with another non-zero, the same non-zero number, so n over n, that is always equal to 1. Kaya lang ang n nga na yan hindi pwedeng zero. Ito yung confusion because 5 over 5 is equal to 1. Sasabihin nila na 0 over 0 because you are dividing two the same numbers, the answer is still 1. No, actually meron restriction dito na n over n is 1. Yes, that is true provided that n is not equal to 0. So when you learn division in elementary, kasi walang ganyan-ganyan, parang kaartehan lang yan. Basta if you divide two numbers that are the same, the answer is always 1. But we need to think of this restriction. The numbers that you are dividing cannot be 1. So tama naman yung sinabi ninyo, 0 over 0 is indeterminate. Alright. When 0 is divided by a non-zero number n, the answer is always 0. That's correct. So that's what we applied here. That's why 0 over 5 is equal to 0. 0 over 6 or 0 over any non-zero number is always 0. So the numerator is 0 and the denominator is a non-zero number. That's the time na-mute natin si Maingay. if the numerator is 0 and the denominator is a non-zero number, that's the time it's 0. Because if it's the other way around, a non-zero number divided by 0, the answer is undefined. So you need to master that, i-memorize natin. Minsan kasi nagkakabaliktad. Ito pa yung 0 at ito pa yung undefined, no? But what I want to emphasize here is, why are they called that way? Bakit n over 0, a non-zero number divided by 0 is undefined? Why are they called that way? So, umpisahan natin dyan. Why do you think? Anyone? Bakit kaya ganyan yung tawag sa kanya? Ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng 10 over 2 equal to, well, this is 5. Tama ba? If we divide 10 by 2, the answer is 5. One way of, or another way of looking this one is, when you multiply 5 to 2, it will give us 10. So, ganun din dito. Kunyari, 9 over 3, that is 3. When you divide 9 by 3, the answer is 3. Another way of saying that, when you multiply 3 and 3, the answer is 9. Because multiplication and division are inverse operations, no? When it comes to numbers. So, ganun din dapat dito. Ang question na 5 over 0, you are actually looking for a number such that when you multiply it to 0, the answer is 5. Para masundan natin to, para the same lang. Dito, when you multiply 5 to 2, the answer is 10. That is correct. When you multiply 3 to the denominator here, which is still 3, the answer is 9. That is correct. Now, if that rule applies here, if you can find a number when multiplied to this denominator will give us 5, then 5 over 0 is not undefined because you were able to look for that number. Such that, again, when multiplied to 0, the answer is 5. But can you find a number when you multiply it to 0, the answer is 5? Meron ba?
Answer.
Wala. Kasi kapag i-multiply natin sa 0, kahit anong number yan, 0 ang sagot. Tama ba?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So, walang makakasatisfy dito. Does not exist. Tama ba?
Yes, sir.
That's why we call it undefined. So, parang yun yung ibig sabihin ng undefined. It does not exist. We cannot find a number multiplied to 0 gives us a non-zero number. Specifically, in this case, 5. That's the reason why it's called undefined. Now, how about this one? Bakit ang 0 over 0 ay indeterminate? Sinatawag natin na indeterminate. Ganon din kasi, kung meron sanang sagot ang 0 over 0, sabihin natin na m. Kung merong sagot yan, kung nag-i-exist siya, kung number talaga siya, one number, any number from the number line, from the set of real numbers, if we multiply it to 0, ibibigay niya yung 0 na numerator. Parang yung ginawa din natin dito. Now, what's the problem with this? What are numbers where when multiplied to 0 gives us 0? Magbigay nga kayo. Ano yung example ni m? What numbers, example of m, that when multiplied to 0 gives us 0?
0, sir.
0. So 0 times 0 is 0. Tama. What else?
1.
1 times 0 is 0. Tama?
Numbers.
Or
Numbers.
any numbers. Any numbers. And how many numbers do we have?
10.
10?
We have 10 for
10 lang? So ang 12 ba hindi number?
Madami, sir.
Madami. Gaano karami?
Indefinite.
Indefinite? Infinitely many. Tama. Yung pinakita natin kanina, di ba, na nasa number line siya, kaya may arrowhead sa magkabilang side kasi hindi natatapos. There are infinitely many real numbers. So actually, we are referring to real numbers. So, sobrang dami ng possible values ni m. Kaya natin tinatawag na indeterminate kasi depende. Sobrang dami nila. Yung solution dito, yung values, yung possible na values ni m. tinatawag natin na indeterminate. Dito, it does not exist. Undefined. Wala. Dito, sobrang dami naman. Indeterminate. So those are our indeterminate and undefined terms. Alright, questions? Do we have questions regarding undefined and indeterminate forms? There are other undefined and indefinite form, indeterminate. Yes, there are other forms of other indeterminate forms. We'll be discussing it later on, but I'd like to start with this one, 0 over 0. Okay, so if none, then let's proceed to the next one, function and function notations. This is the same topic that was discussed under Math 21, Mathematics in the Modern World. That's chapter 2, function and function notations. In fact, we started with the relations pa nga eh, so that is more detailed. Anyway, I'd like to give you a review of what we mean by a function. So what is a function? Ano yung function? Ano yung ibig sabihin ng function? In the simplest sense, in the most general way, what is a function?
Set of ordered pairs.
A set of ordered pairs. So kahit anong set of ordered pairs, kung gawa ako ng set, tapos ordered pairs ang laman, halimbawa 3, pwede naman. Maglagay ako ng kahit anong numbers dyan, that is already a function.
No.
So ano yung isa pang condition?
A relationship
A
or
relationship
expression involving one or more variables.
such that
O yung
sige, 1, 2, 1, 5, 1, 5 ulit. Ay, di. 1, 3, 5. Yeah. Is this a function? Kasi based from what you said, it's just a set of ordered pairs. Ordered pair naman to, ordered pair naman to. Ganun din dito. Tapos, sinulat as a set. Yes?
no.
Why no?
Kasi element of X should have exactly one element.
Or how do we say that in a simpler manner? There should be no 2 or more x coordinates that are repeated
With a common first.
or with a common first coordinate. So in this case, 1 dyan, 1 pa rin dito. It doesn't qualify as a function. This is just a relation but not a function. Okay lang yung y coordinates na nauulit. That is not a problem. Ang problema dito ay itong coordinates natin. So, if I could just change one of them, say 4, then it becomes a function. So, actually, ganun lang ang function. Yun lang naman yung ibig sabihin ng function. Just a set of ordered pairs. How do we name functions? We normally make use of small letters. Okay, yeah. Let me write here another function. Kahit gawin natin 4. Yes. Ordered pair naman lahat sila, naka-set notation naman, and walang nauulit na x coordinates. So it qualifies as a function. So those are our functions. Now, are these the types of functions that we will be dealing with in calculus? The answer is no, because yes, these are functions pero finite. There are finite numbers of ordered pairs or elements in the set. So normally, what we have in calculus are functions with infinitely many ordered pairs. So by the way, before we proceed to that, I have also included there the other ways on how we could write functions. So instead of using set notation, we can make use of the table method. How do we make use of table method? Suppose f of x, I'm going to write it in table method. Madali lang, di ba? Yan lang. 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, 5. So what's important is the correspondence or the pairing of the numbers here are maintained. So lahat ng mga x-coordinate nasa taas, yung kanilang mga partners na y ay nasa baba. You can actually do it vertically. Pwede naman ganyan. So 1, 4, hindi. 1, 2, 4, 5, at saka 3, 5. You can also do the same with g of x. You can actually make use of another way, yung tinatawag nating na mapping. So nandito lahat yung x at nandito lahat yung y. So this is 1 map 2, 2, 4 map 2, 5, and 3 map 2, again 5. And so there are a lot of ways on how we write functions. The set notation, the table method, and the mapping method are applicable if there are finite. How do we define or what do we mean by finite? Ano yung finite? Ano yung ibig sabihin yan? And by the way, it's finite.
Can be counted.
Can be counted and ano ba?
There will be n.
It will end, yes. Or the cardinality is a natural number. So masasabi mo kung ilan yung elements. Kung infinite, actually you can count naman. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on is still countable, but you will never end. So the cardinality there is not in an integer. So that's how we differentiate finite from infinite sets. So if the function has finite number of ordered pairs, normally it's better to use the set notation or the table or the mapping. But for infinite sets, normally ang mas maganda na gamitin dyan ay using a graph or an equation. At yun yung makikita natin sa calculus. Puro graph yan at equation kasi nga the function that we are dealing with is or are composing infinite number of ordered pairs. So kindly read your module kasi I think that was presented in more detail. Right? So that this time we're going immediately to examples of functions. So if you read your, or I mean types of functions, if you read your module, how do we generally classify our functions? The first category is called algebraic. The other one is transcendental. What are the examples of algebraic? So normally we have our polynomials, and then the other one is the rational functions. And then pagdating naman sa transcendental, maraming halimbawa yan. Merong trigonometric, logarithmic, lahat ito example yan. Exponential, inverse trigonometric, ganon. Normally ito yung mga transcendental. So sa algebraic, normally makikita tayo ng term na x raised to n. That's the basic form. Rational is just a ratio of two polynomials. Transcendental, our trigonometric functions, the sine function, the cosine function, the tangent functions, their reciprocals, meaning cosecant, cosine, at saka cotangent. Logarithmic functions, or ln, diba? Log x, y equal to log x, y equal to ln x, or ln x. Exponential, 2 raised to x, 3 raised to x, ganon, e raised to x. Inverse trigonometric functions, ano yung mga to? Arc sine, arc cosine, ganon. So anyway, those are a lot of functions and we will discuss them one by one later on. Now, why am I presenting this one? In calculus, actually, later on, we will be doing the same thing for the majority of the semester. So, ang gagawin lang naman natin ay mag-differentiate or to compute for the derivatives. What makes it more difficult or more complex? Because we will be differentiating different types of function. So, differentiate polynomials, differentiate rational, differentiate trigonometric functions until the inverse trigonometric functions. So, actually, we are doing the same thing. It's just that you are doing it in different types of functions. Kaya, magkakaiba. But we are doing the same thing. Differentiate. That's why it's called differential calculus. Calculus 1 is differential calculus. So now, before we proceed to the derivatives, we're going to discuss one by one now the most important dimensions or parts or characteristics of each function. So yun yung ano, meron pa palang special, tama? Merong pangatlong category. So functions yan, special. May mga special functions tayo. Meron tayong step functions, meron tayong piecewise. So let's now talk first. Let's talk about polynomials. Now, according to your module, ano ang general form ng polynomial? Ano yung definition ng kanya?
Consists of variables and coefficients.
Ano yung form niya mismo? Ganyan, di ba?
Yes, sir. A1 x raised to n minus 1
Plus,
en. Sir, walang x dun sa module.
tama. Tamang yung module ninyo. Yan, that's the form of polynomial. So, anong ibig sabihin niyan? What are a sub zeros here? So, kung papalitan natin ito ng mga numbers, those are examples of a polynomial already. But let's first discuss the types of numbers that can be substituted here. So here are a sub n's, for example, a sub 0, a sub 1 until a sub n, they are coefficients. So they can be any number. So a sub n should be an element of the set of real numbers. So anong ibig sabihin ng notation na ito? Yung mga coefficients natin, kahit anong real number, yung present natin kanina, mapa-negative pa yan, mapa-fraction, mapa-rational pa nga, mapa-irrational yan, kahit basta real numbers, pwede nating ilagay dito. Pwedeng 0. So kung 0 yung piliin natin, edi mawawala yung buong term na yan. Because 0 times whatever that number is, we are sure that it is 0. Now, how about n? Yung n. Yung n ba kahit anong real numbers din?
Non-negative integers.
Non-negative?
Integers.
Anong ibig sabihin nun? Whole numbers. Tama ba? Non-negative integers, that is equivalent to whole numbers. So basta ang n mo dito ay whole numbers. Non-negative integers meaning the positive integers including 0. 0 is still non-negative integer. And ganun din nga, whole number includes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So, yun lang yung pwede nating pagpilian na value ni n. Hindi pwedeng fraction, hindi pwedeng irrational, di ba? Mas lalong hindi pwede yung irrational kasi ang irrational hindi siya whole numbers. So, whole number lang dapat yung pagpilian natin dyan. Alright. So, let's create functions now based from that definition. So, ito yung ating template. So, we can think of this one as our template. We can think of any a sub n and then n. So, ang una natin gagawin siguro ay mag-identify ng n. So, for our first polynomial function, what is the value of n? We can just think of a value of n na whole number, basta whole number siya. What could be a value of n? Anyone? Anyone? Mag-isip lang ng n.
4, sir.
4. Sige. 4. 4 plus, so yung mga a sub n natin, pwedeng space muna natin. X. Ano yung susunod sa formula? N minus 1. That means we subtract 1 from 4. So x cubed plus, ano pa? 2
Excellent.
plus, ganyan, di ba? Plus x sub 0. Raised to 0. And then, we can now think of our a sub n. Ang sabi natin kanina, yung mga ito ay coefficients and they can be any real numbers. So will you please give us a real number then?
3.
4.
7.
10.
Pwede namang negative o negative, ano pa? Negative
6.
6. Pwede na namang fractions. Pwedeng fractions din.
2 over 3.
2 over 3. Pwede din namang irrational numbers. Basta nga real number.
5.
Pi. Yan. So, if we rewrite this one, para maganda lang tignan, we got our first polynomial function na nabuo ay 3x raised to 4 plus 4x cubed minus, plus minus, so minus na lang siya, 6x squared plus 2/3 x na lang siya. We do not have to write the exponent na 1 plus pi. Bakit pi lang yung isusulat natin dyan? Because x at 0 is
2.
0? O di 0 dapat siya, 0 times pi.
1.
1. Yes, x raised to 0, any number raised to 0 is 1. That's why it only became
1/4.
pi. Tama. So, pi na lang isulat natin dyan. So, that is our first polynomial. Now, let's create more. So, ganun pa rin. Gamitin natin yung template. Pangalanan natin ng iba. Siguro g of x para hindi malito sa f of x. So, ganun din. Ano kaya ang ang n natin for this time? Pwede bang 1/2?
No.
No, kasi nga whole number dapat yung n. Sige. What is the value of n this time?
7.
7. Plus, o di mahaba na to, x. Pwede bang idiretso na, sige. Idiretso na natin yung mga a sub n? Pwede naman.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Dahil real number siya, pwede bang 0 ang ilagay natin? Real number ba ang 0? Na coefficient? Diba? How about this one?
Yes, sir.
How about the coefficient of the next term?
5.
5 plus, pwede bang 0 ulit? Pwede naman. X raised to 5. Yung sumunod sa
5.
exponent na 6. Minus naman ngayon.
8.
8x raised to 4. Plus, gawin natin 0 para plus
2x raised to 2.
2x squared minus
1.
1x, ganun. So, x na lang.
Yes, sir.
Tapos, plus, x raised to 1 pa lang tayo eh. Hindi pa tayo umabot ng x raised to 0.
0 to 0.
0. Parang 0, x raised to 0, ganyan?
Yes, sir.
Alright. So, how can we rewrite now g of x? Simplihan na natin. Well, 0 times any number is 0. So, we do not have to write this term because it's 0 nga. Magsimula tayo sa 5x
5x.
raised to 6. Ganon din dito, sa term na ito, magiging 0 yan. So, we do not have to write it. We now write minus 8x raised to 4. Plus, again, we have a 0 coefficient here. Magiging 0 yan. Our next term should be 2x squared minus x. We do not have the right to write the exponent 1. And then this is, all in all, 0. So, all in all, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 non-zero terms.
4 terms.
Yeah, so polynomials lahat yan. Pwede naman natin kasing simplihan ang tataas kasi ng n na in-identify nyo. So, I can start with 1. So, halimbawa, 4x, ang my n is 1 because it's still naman a whole number. So, it's 1 minus 4x 0. So, my h of x actually is 4x minus 4.
4.
Pwede namang mag-start ulit tayo sa 2. Ano kaya ang pangalan ng q of x na lang? Q of x. So siguro negative 4x squared. So my n is 2 plus, so it becomes x dito 3 minus 5. So that is q of x. Those are all polynomials. These are all polynomials because galing lahat sila dyan. Is this a polynomial? V of x. Can we consider this one as a polynomial?
Yes, sir.
Yes? Are you
Sir,
sure?
no.
Why?
No, sir.
Bakit
Kasi po,
no?
No, sir. No, sir.
Yes, why?
It has a negative exponent.
Yes, because ano nga yung condition natin? It has to be a whole number. And obviously, negative 3 is not a whole number. Kasi ang whole number ng 0, 1, 2, 3, this is a negative integer. So, hindi siya whole number. So, hindi pwede yan. Pero, paano kung ganito? How about this one?
Hindi pa rin, sir.
Bakit? Why is that?
Ay, same pa rin naman, sir, kapag
Same ba sila? Di ba pwede nating isulat ito as 2x cubed din? If the variable is in the denominator, it's negative.
pero negative yung ano.
Yes, you can actually put it above and the exponent becomes positive. So it's positive. Walang na-violate. Yes, this is polynomial. Polynomial. Wait, let's have another one. X raised to 1/2. Is that a polynomial?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Because, again, 1/2 is
Not whole number.
not a whole number.
We need a whole number.
Okay. Sometimes you can see this one as square root of x. Tama ba? Ano bang ibig sabihin ng radical numbers? Ang kanilang exponent ay fraction. Yung denominator siya yung index na nandyan. So, parehas lang sila. Ibig sabihin, parehas silang hindi polynomials. Both of them are not polynomials.
Polynomial.
Okay. So, now, let's talk about their domain and range. So, for this part of the topic, let's go. We're going to make use of this one. So, let's just use the same examples that we had here. Isa-isahin na muna lang natin. Okay? So, what you can see here actually is the graph of the polynomial 4x minus 4. So, as you can see here, it's a line. Tama ba? It is a line. And then dito, ito yung red na ito yung graph naman ni negative 4x squared. Oops, mali yata to. Negative 4x squared, asa na ngayon? Plus 3x minus 5. Ganyan dapat. And then, ito naman, si blue ba ito? It's a very irregular graph. And then ito, yan. So, mag-start tayo dito. Ano lang ibig sabihin ng degree? Degree of a polynomial. What do we mean by degrees of polynomial? That is the highest
Highest or greatest
exponent.
power.
Highest
of the
exponent of the polynomial terms.
Alright. So, if we start with our first example of polynomial here, h of x, the name of the polynomial is, of the function, of the polynomial function is h, by the way. So, nandito naman sa graph, h nakapangalan. 4x minus 4, what is the degree?
1.
1. So, 1 ang pinakamataas na value ng n dito. It's actually n yung ina-identify natin kanina, no? So, makikita natin na kapag ang degree ng isang polynomial ay 1, it's just a line. That's why a polynomial of degree 1 is called linear functions because the graph is a line. How about this one? What is the degree of this function? Negative 4x squared plus 3x minus 2. It's 2.
2.
Yes. And a polynomial function of degree 2 is sometimes called a quadratic function. Parang special names lang nila because of their degrees. The graph of a quadratic function that is a polynomial of degree 2, it is a parabola. So a parabola looks like this. A parabola that is a function must open downward or upward. Downward yan kasi negative ito. Itong 4 natin na coefficient ni x squared. If we make it positive, it becomes upward. How about this one, the degree?
6.
Yes, 6. Obviously, ang pinakamataas dyan na exponent ay 6. And then finally, this one,
4.
4.
4.
Yeah, so of degree 4. So, wala nang pangalang special na yung mga higher degrees natin. Actually, linear, quadratic, cubic kung 3, pero wala tayong example na cubic. Bigay tayo ng example. Pwede naman. X cubed minus 2x plus 5, for example. Yeah, that is a cubic function. Degree 3 siya. Alright, now what's next na i-discuss natin about the domain at saka range ng isang function. So, particular to a polynomial function. Ano ba ang domain? Anong ibig sabihin ng domain? Ang domain, mas madali nating makikita yan using the graph. So, domain is the part of the x-axis covered by the graph. So, anong ibig sabihin ng covered? By covered, we mean kung ano yung nasakop ng graph natin. So, may limit ba yung part ng x-axis na na-cover ng ating graph? Because, of course, our graph is extending indefinitely. Hindi naman matatapos yung line na yan, papunta doon. Papunta dito sa baba yung kabila. So, kahit i-zoom in natin, nagpo-progress pa rin yung graph natin. Hindi siya natatapos. Because again, the functions that we will be dealing with are infinite, di ba? Infinite number of pairs na functions. So if we think of it, yung mga numbers dito sa positive side na to ay makakover yan ng function. Kasi nga itong graph na nasa taas na ito ay hindi yan matatapos. Ganon din dito sa baba. All numbers dito sa negative, including 0, will be covered by the functions. So that's the domain of the function, this linear polynomial function. So if all numbers are covered by the function, what set is that? We presented this one a while back. Is it just the whole numbers or the integers? Ano nang set ito? Yung buong real numbers na ito? Nasabi ko na. This is the set of real numbers because it covers everything in our x-axis. So parang walang limitation. Kung sana yung graph natin ay nag-start lang dyan, dito sa gitna, wala yung graph na yan sa baba, nag-start lang siya dito, paakyat, ibig sabihin, ang na-cover lang niya na part ng x-axis ay yung positive x-axis nandito. So in that case, siya lang ang magiging domain natin. Positive real numbers. Hindi lang siya basta real numbers, pero positive real numbers. But in this case, it's not. So it's covering all the numbers. So we say the domain is the set of real numbers. For proper notations, you please go back to your module. So nandun yung mga proper notations natin. So you can write the set of real numbers, or you can just write the Greek representation, yung mukhang R. That is our representation of our set of real numbers. Now, how about the range? If we are talking about the range, we are looking at the y-axis. Which part of the y-axis is covered by the graph? Well, this is just, again, a line extending upward and downward. Meron bang hindi na-cover ng graph? Meron ba?
Wala, sir.
Wala. So, still, just the same, since na-cover lahat ng numbers sa ating y-axis, the range is the set of real numbers. So, parehas lang yun. Now, let's proceed to another example. Ibalik natin, zoom natin para makita natin. This is our second polynomial. It's of degree 2. Sabi natin, ang graph niya ay parabola. Now, let's talk about the domain first. So again, if we are talking about the domain, we are talking about the part of the x-axis covered by the graph. Meron bang hindi na-cover or na-cover lahat? Siyempre, ang iisipin natin dito, this is extending indefinitely. Walang katapusan dyan. Ganun din dito. Meron bang part ng x-axis na hindi makakover ng graph?
Wala, sir, kasi mag-extend siya palawak hanggang sa baba.
So, everything is covered. Tama?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if that is the case, what is the domain of this function? What is the domain of this function?
Set of all real numbers.
Okay, set of real numbers. Ganun din sa... Okay, let's now talk about the range of this function. Obviously, not all numbers in the y-axis is covered by the function. Tama ba?
Yes, sir.
So walang part of the graph dito sa bandang to. Yung kaniyang covered lang na part of the y-axis is from this point, whatever that point is, hanggang dito. So what is the range? Now that's the problem na. How do we identify the range? Kaya dapat may pre-calculus kayo sa senior high because we have to know that one, whatever that number is. No kaya yan? So, yung highest dyan, yung highest na point, kung saan siya nakatapat na y value, doon tayo magsisimula, yung range. So, whatever value is that, pababa. That's the range of that function. Eh, ano yun? That's negative 71 over 16. Or, that's negative 4.4375. So, mas mataas ng negative 4.4, pero medyo nasa baba lang, hindi abot ng negative 4. Kapag sa high school, di ba, tinuruan tayong ilagay ito sa vertex form para makita natin yung vertex, yung nandito. And based from that vertex, malalaman natin kung ano yung y value. Kasi the vertex is just a point. So, kukunin lang natin ang y coordinate ng point na iyon. Ayan. So, how do we write now the range? How
Y
do we...
is less than or equal 4.4375.
So the range is, sulat lang natin dito. How do we write it? The set of all x such that x is less than or equal to negative, kapag fraction ang gagamitin ko, 71 over 16. Such that x is an element of the real numbers. So that's how we write it. Yung domain niya kanina, dali lang yan. R lang na sabi ninyo, R. This is our third polynomial, degree 6. What is the domain? Nasakop ba lahat ng x-axis? Was it all covered?
Yes, sir.
Yes, so that the domain is, again,
Set of real numbers.
the set of real numbers. So when we write it, we can just simply make use of the notation for the real numbers. How about the range? Lahat ba ng y-axis covered by the graph?
No, sir.
Obviously, merong, di ba? May pinakamababang point, the lowest point based on the graph. What is that? Is it exactly negative 2? Hindi. Hindi na naman siya exact. So, yun yung kailangan nating solve. Pwede naman tayo mag-estimate. Ayan, yung y, negative 2.01. Negative 2.01. Si point C. Yun yung vertex ni graph dito. Hindi yan parabola. Naka-enlarge lang siya. Oops. Alright, so how do we write now the range of this function? Negative 2.1. Pero pataas. Kasi if we go back, ang range niya magsisimula sa negative 2.01, paakyat na ngayon kasi andun yung part ng graph na merong value. So how do we write it? The range is, so the domain is still R, it's just the same, but the range is the set of all x such that x is, this time, greater than or equal to negative 2.01. Dapat element pa rin siya ni real number. So, ang ibig sabihin niyan, si x, real number, kaya lang dapat greater than or equal to negative 2.01. Alright, so we are almost done. Ilas lang natin to before we conclude the meet because it's almost 12. Let's have the other function. Alright. So, parang ganun din dito. Actually, this is of degree 4. The domain is, of course, covered. Everything in the x-axis is covered. Hindi lang obvious kasi parang masyadong matirik dito. Pero theoretically, if we extend further, it will cover this number until the end. Hanggang dyan. The range, whatever that number, it's somewhere sa baba ng negative 10. Just below it. Lagay tayo ng point just to estimate siguro. That is
10.1.
negative 10.03. Ganon. Negative 10.03 pataas, that's the range. Pero estimation lang yun, there's a proper way of computing kung ano nga ba talaga ito. Kung negative 10.03 yan or negative 10.04. So, how about this one? The other function. What is this again? It's the cubic function. What is the domain? In the x-axis, are all numbers covered by the function? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Alright. Yes. So the domain of this function, of this cubic function, x cubed minus 2x plus 7, is
Set of real numbers.
set of real numbers. How about the range?
Same, sir.
Same.
Because as we can see, wala namang exemption. Sa point na ito, na-cover lahat yung nasa taas at nasa baba. This function is extending upward and downward. So everything in this y-axis will be part of the graph. So the range is still the set of real numbers. Meron ba kayong nakitang patterns from the domain in range na nakita natin sa lahat ng examples natin dito? A general observation? Mag-start tayo sa domain. Ano yung domain ng first example natin kanina?
Set of real numbers ata, sir.
Yes. How about the second?
Same din.
How about the third?
Same din po, sir. Until
Fourth
the
and
last
fifth. Yes. So, any observation?
domain is the same.
The domain is the same. Actually, that's because for any polynomial, so make sure that it passes the condition for it to be really considered a polynomial. If that's a polynomial, the domain is always the real number. The set of real numbers. So, dapat makuha nyo yun. Para hindi na kayo nagka-graph kung domain lang naman yung tinatanong. Kung polynomial yan, mapaano man yung degree, mapa 1, mapa 2, or mataas, the domain is always the set of real numbers. Nagkakatalo lang yan sa range. So if we notice, sometimes the range of a polynomial function is real number, just the same, but sometimes, for example, the case for this parabola, the domain is not obviously the range is not obviously the set of real numbers, because as we can see, only part of the y-axis is covered by the graph. So that's how we identify the range. So the range magkakaiba, but the domain is always the same for a polynomial function. It is always the set of real numbers. Okay, so I think I'll be cutting the lecture at this point.